Okay, so as we're gathering, oh great, looks like some people are already introducing themselves in the chat. You are welcome to say hello. And we were going to request that during Marta's presentation, if you have a question you want to post in the chat and then we can try to get to it later, that's great. But we wanted to keep the chat back and forth to kind of a dull roar during Marta's actual presentation. But on either side of that, please use it freely. Hello, Pam. Hi, Diana. Seeing some people I know. Okay. Well, we do have a limited time, an hour and 15 minutes, so we should probably go ahead and get started. Is that all right, Carrie and Carolina and Marta? All right, super. So first off, welcome. We're very excited you're all here. This has been a long time coming and planning, and we're still planning. The clay is still wet. We're working on this speaker series. My name is Felicia Chavez, and I'll update my little name here in the list. Systems Thinking Marin. And I'm based here in the San Francisco Bay Area in Marin County, and I've been promoting systems thinking in Marin for some time. Carolina and Carrie have been my co-conspirators over the past year or so. And we just wanted to say first, everybody is welcome here. And I think I'm partially inspired to say that because as we were advertising this Women in Systems Thinking, we realized that some people were thinking it was only for women. And so we wanted to just say gender fluid, men, all above, all below, where everybody is welcome. So that's the first thing. This is the first in a series of 6 conversations. Obviously, the first one today is with Marta Ceroni, who will be sharing with us about the work of Donella Meadows, very important systems thinker. And this event series came out of a desire to spur greater collaboration among systems thinking practitioners, and or perhaps to understand what obstacles there are to this greater working together of the world of systems thinkers and systems thinking practitioners. So we encourage you to make connections with others today. We have a very kind of messy and not quite at all done platform that we're working on. WordPress has if you go to wordpress.com/P2, you'll see a platform called P2. And I'm going to post a link in the chat where if you're brave and want to experiment with us, and especially if you happen to be a person who's familiar with the WordPress interface, or maybe even have a depth of knowledge in WordPress and want to help us kind of shape it and make it more of a collaborative platform for people from this group and future conversations to post messages and all that. If you go to that link that I just posted in the chat, you'll have to ask to be invited. Or request access to the platform. And then it might take us a while, maybe a week, maybe even 2, to sort of set it up a little bit. Send me a message. I'm going to put my email in the chat if you're like a serious WordPress person and might be interested in helping us to set that experiment up. Let me just make sure I'm typing my email accurately. So today is all about Donella Meadows, but we want to frame the whole discussion series to some extent referencing Meadows' work. And so I want to share with you how Donella Meadows addresses the purpose, quote unquote, of a system. So this is from the book Thinking in Systems, a primer from page 14. She says, a system's function or purpose is not necessarily spoken, written, or expressed explicitly, except through the operation of the system. The best way to deduce the system's purpose is to watch for a while and see how the system behaves. So therefore, the purpose of today is being subtly set in the background by us organizers, but also attempting to make that overt And really the purpose is what comes out of today. So we invite you to continue to work with us and participate in the future speakers in this series. And with that, I will hand it off to Carrie, unless there's anything I was supposed to cover that I did not.
That's great. Thanks so much, Felicia. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, and welcome to this moment, this exciting moment where we're gathered here together to lift up the work of Donella Meadows through the lens and the voice of Marta Ceroni. I want to invite you all. We have over 300 registrants for the experience today. And just to know, for those of you who are just arriving, it is being recorded and will be public. So if for any reason you do not wish to be made visible through that recording, we ask that you go off camera and of course stay on mute. But before we jump into the dialogue, the rich dialogue that I'm about to have with Marta, I'd like to offer us an opportunity to just get a little bit grounded. I imagine that many of us are coming from, a flurry of activity on our calendars, or maybe some of us are just waking up, but I'd like to really bring us all into the space together. And so the invitation is, and you're welcome to go off camera for this if you'd like to have some privacy, but it's really just a breathing exercise, and the purpose of which is to regulate our nervous systems and bring us to a place of calm and peace as we get started. I do believe there's someone unmuted, so if we make sure that everyone is muted. So this breath exercise is something that you may be familiar with, but it's basically, I just invite you to take 2 sips of air and then a very long breath out. And it turns out this is something our bodies do every few minutes anyway, as like sort of an automatic way of regulating our nervous system. So this is something that you can do consciously. And so let's just spend about 30 or 45 seconds. And again, everyone should be on mute, myself included. I'm not going to breathe in the microphone. And I'm just going to invite you to take a breath in and then another sip in before you try to release all the air from your lungs. So let's begin. Okay, and I invite you to take your last sip and join us back here on the grid. And just welcoming everyone in as you all drop in through the waiting room. Just want to thank you all for being here today, and really so grateful to be able to be in conversation with my dear friend Marta Ceroni, and thankful to my colleagues, Felicia, if you want to wave, because I don't think you're pinned, and Carolina also, who is thankfully handling all of the important logistical details in the background. I've been working with them for over a year to look for ways to invite the systems field to collaborate more generatively. And this is the first example of how we're trying to manifest that. So we just are really grateful that you all are taking time to be with us. So Marta, are we ready to go? Okay. You're still on mute.
I think I'm okay.
Yeah, there you are. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, perfect. Good morning. Or I guess good afternoon to you. So So Marta, thank you so much for agreeing to do this for us. And I can really feel Dana's energy here today. And I just want to acknowledge that I know that there are many people on this call who have great familiarity, deep familiarity, potentially even work experience with Dana. And then some of you may only be hearing about her for the first time. So we just want to apologize in advance for those of you where, you're having to grasp to fill in gaps about her as you listen into the conversation. We'll do our best to provide some follow-up materials that will expose you further to her work if you're not familiar with her. And then for those of you who do know about her, we will do our best to honor her memory and her work. So Marta, welcome. And I'm not going to obviously read your bio for folks. I hope people had a chance to see that before we got here today. And if not, we'll also provide that by way of follow-up. But it's such an honor to invite you in to talk a little bit about your relationship to Dana, to the Academy for Systems Change, to the Limits to Growth. And I'd love to just hear a little bit about how you came to this work and what has drawn you in.
Yeah, thank you, Carrie. I'm super happy to be here in community with you organizers and a lot of the folks here who I know. And I also wanted to mention that among the people who are dear colleagues of Dana, Donella Meadows, we have Anitra Thorhog here, who we might hear from about a little bit later. But Anita was also a dear friend of Donella Meadows, colleague and marine biologist of wonderful experience. So we'll get to her later. But in the meantime, just going back to your question, I come to the work of systems thinker, or the discipline of systems thinking from the ecology side. So I studied forest ecology, and so ecology is filled with systems thinking and systems work applied to the understanding of how natural systems work, in particular forests, of course. So that is one piece. As my career developed, or my curiosity, I should say, developed, I was very eager to understand drivers of change and why forest ecosystems were being transformed, depleted, and converted into other uses of the land. And so a frame for me to get to that deeper level of understanding was the field of ecological economics. So a branch of economics, or actually an alternative view of economics that tries to reconcile humans and nature in a way that is transformative and asks the question of what the economy is for, and for whom the economy is for. And so that lens is very important, because Donella Meadows was also very steeped in that work. In fact, I learned from dear friends of Donella Meadows. So Herman Daly, who is considered the father of ecological economics, was a dear friend of Donella Meadows. And so I've gravitated in that world of Donella Meadows from one generation down, and seeing how that work has been applied also in academic settings. And more recently, actually, I got connected to the work of systems from more of a, how would you say, organizational perspective. And how do you actually organize and set up process of change? And so that transition between systems thinking and systems change, actually, I lived through my profession. And that was also because of the important connection between Donella Meadows and people like Peter Senge, who was a dear colleague and friend for some time, although they had differences in the way that they worked to apply systems thinking. And so altogether, this arc of building on the work of Donella Meadows has really been around the root causes that are at the basis of our economic system, and that's where we can find actually some of the solution to change towards the direction of equity and sustainability. But also this idea of how do we engage as humans with one another? How do we collaborate? How do we create spaces for change that are transformational, that respect the complexity of systems, as opposed to simply problem solve, but you actually come with an array that you mimic the complexity in the way you show up in the spaces for change. And so for that, I think Donella Meadows, and she loved to be called Dana, so I'll go for Dana. She also embodied that part of the humanities and the heart piece, which I think is extremely important and used to be not included in the package when people were relating to her work. But because of the type of community building that she did, we know that that piece was very important to her.
Thank you, Marta. And I'm wondering if we can go a little bit deeper on that particular point. You evoked a question that Dana often posed, which is, how do you live your life with all that you know? And so I'm wondering if you could go a little bit deeper with us on that point.
Yeah, thank you. All the good questions give me shivers, so I just got a little bit. Yeah, so thank you for that. I think Dana Meadows was someone who actually did not see a distinction between like work life and life, and so she constantly tried to integrate what she was learning into the work, but also embodying the change that she wanted to see. You can imagine, or let's just imagine this, we are 50 years after the publication of Limits to Growth. There's this brilliant team of young scientists, of which then she is the lead author of Limits to Growth, and they see through the simulation work, the first global model, if you will, that looks at the question of what happens if population and the industrial system continues to grow exponentially as it had been for decades. What is the future of humankind? Is that even possible? What are the consequences of doing that without checking these growth processes? And so their model was consistently producing collapse, meaning that within 100 years of when they started to model, we would see a decline in population and in the industrial capacity if the policies were not going to be changed significantly. And so we are approaching kind of to the time frame of the model, if you will, and there's a lot of different caveats around the modeling piece, but that's not of importance right now here. What I think is important is for the conversation is that this team actually saw repeatedly the model producing an outcome that nobody really wants. And so while it was not really a predictive model, what they developed was really putting a difficult, inconvenient truth on the table, not only to be seen, but also to be acted upon. So what will be our choices now that an important truth has been put on the table in ways that cannot be denied? And so one of the first consequences of that, of putting that truth on the table, was really for the members of the team to live their lives in a purposeful way, in alignment with what they had seen. And for Dana Meadows, that meant dedicating her life to teaching, for example, around sustainability, to creating communities and demonstration sites like Cobb Hill, the farm and intentional community that she created not far from where I live, 30 minutes south of here. That demonstrated how you can live intentionally and sustainably on the land. And then she also lived in a very networked way. She would I would say, infiltrate different places. Like, but it's like, how do you live a life in a networked way so that you can actually have ripple effects and embody the change in multiple environments, in multiple places. She placed enormous importance to the communication and the voice and being present. So she really prioritized that, especially towards the later part of her life. Being able to tell stories that bring truth, but also in a loving, respectful, I think she uses the term ennobling. I kind of say it like with my Italian accent, but it brings nobility to anyone. It ennobles people who reads her columns, and we have all 1,000+ written pieces by her on our archive, donellameadows.org. Um, so it's an important question for all of us. When I look at her life, it's like, oh, what are those crossroads where she actually made intentional choices to respond to the reality that she was living through and seeing. And to me, she's been always a message of hope. And I think that's in a lot of the environmental work, including the work that I've done also in academia, that piece around hope was missing. And so oftentimes I've heard in different environments, also not so academic, this importance of how do you deliver truth with love, so this dichotomy of truth and love, so that it becomes inspiring and welcoming and inclusive.
Thank you. It's so beautiful to imagine that the marrying of her intellectual prowess with her desire to connect. And, in that same sort of vein, you talked a lot about the importance of information flows, which now, gets a little bit to the intellectual side of the work. And I know, this is a particular moment in which we're all sort of enmeshed in multiple information flows. And, you were holding up the importance of information flows for her and now for us. And I would love to hear, sort of how you're seeing that thinking apply in this moment. It feels so germane in this moment when we are living in a time of information overflow.
Yes, so information flows are one of the top leverage points in Donella's hierarchy of intervention points or places of power in a system. And she would say that who detains power over information has real power. And it's not just information as we are seeing, for example, in the media, or whether, like in the terrible moment that we are living in, the crisis in Ukraine, oftentimes people have said that this is a war around information flows, or the narrative, who is telling what narrative, or who is sharing what narrative. And so whoever has power on the narrative has real power, of course, because the narrative also is the place from where a lot of the structures in systems, or the policies, or the responses to problems emerge. So it's not just information flows, meaning like news type of information, but it's also the narrative, which is more connected to culture and interpretation of the time that we're living in. And so I think she she had multiple ways to engage with the information. She would say that systems go crazy if information is withheld and or distorted. And she would introduce a new commandment: honor information and information flows. So that was the level of commitment, and that led to truth telling being one of the important qualities for the transition to a sustainable future, in fact. And so it is a mix about the flows, so the quantity of information, the accuracy of the information, who has the power on that, the narrative piece, and also, I think very important, is the ability to hold the truth in all of its pain and complexity. And so her frames and diagnostic tools, like leverage points, for example, but many others, really are helping in looking at current reality with the right tools. And then from there, she would go beyond and say, well, and that's as far as the systems thinking can take us. But then it's the human spirit that needs to make that leap to transformation, to vision. And that's vision is more like that outer space that touches the heart. So I'll stop here because there's a lot of ramifications around information.
Yes, but so apropos, I think. I mean, couldn't be more apropos than in this moment, really, given where we are. And I know that we're both acknowledging that Dana's spirit and her work has risen in the zeitgeist over the last 18 months or more, and I've certainly felt that and been aware of that and been feeling a call, which is what in part drew us here today. And I'm just wondering if you want to share with the audience why you feel like with women's voices are worth listening to now, perhaps more than ever, and why hers in particular might be, coming back into the information flow that we're all experiencing. And I also want to acknowledge that I know you wanted to bring Anitra into the conversation at some point, so I want to just look for your cue on that.
Sure. Yes, I have noticed. Of course, I mean, this is a particular year, right? 2022, relative to 1972, so 50 years of limits to growth. Going back to that work and knowing how Dana Meadows has lived her life in view of that, that's one thread that one could follow. But I think another thread is really that the voices of women are more important than ever, simply because a lot of the systems that have been in place for so long have failed. And so if we are into this kind of systemic failure in many ways, we just need to change leadership models and actually having more women who are able to hold the complexity the way that Donella Meadows has been showing us to do is more important than ever. And so for me, that's very important piece. And I would say that she was operating in very difficult times. I just want to acknowledge the history of women like her at that time. What it meant to really embrace this type of pathway through academia, but also beyond. And so for that, I think it would be very important to hear from Dr. Anitra Dorok, who is a contemporary of Dana, and I might have something more to share about what that meant for them as women, as leaders in systems work. Dr. Anita Thorpe more applied, perhaps, in terms of the ecological restoration of seagrass beds. She's become internationally famous for that. She's a member of the Club of Rome, the International Club of Rome, and actually, she has a whole Wikipedia page dedicated to her amazing career. So anyone who would like to learn more about Dr. Anita Thorpe can do that by simply Googling her name, which I hope someone can put in the chat so that people can just get. I found personally her career very inspiring, and so I'm delighted to bring her here. With her voice and share a little bit, if I can call you Anitra, just for simplicity here, a little bit about your experience of living that a time of academic, life shared with Dana, and also what it meant for Dana to be the main leader the main author of Limits to Growth. What did that mean, for a woman like her, and how was that received in that field?
Am I supposed to talk now?
Yes.
Yes, okay. You
Could
know
you
what?
show your?
I'm having some problem with the video, and it's too bad because I
Ah,
think I look pretty good today. Considering my age, I don't look bad. But anyhow, you'll just have to hear me and not see my 80-year-old look. All right. So I think it was very difficult when she sat down to write the book. For the other people in the group to give the reins over to her. But I do have a letter from Dennis, who of course is still alive and who has been divorced for her for maybe 4 decades, saying that he was the leader of the report itself, putting all the data into the J. Forrester model. And then she was the complete author of the book, which has sold 38 million copies, which is Limits to Growth. And then there were 2 updates, one 10 years after and one 20 years after. But he's very generous about that. And what he said is, when they took this book, which was paid for by different foundations, which were brought together by the Club of Rome, then they convinced both she, Dana, and he, Dennis, that in Europe, no books by women sold. So if the book was to sell, it would have to be a man's name. And so they mulled that over for some time because, of course, that isn't intellectually honest. Dennis did do some extensive editing, but he did not write the book. She wrote the book. She sat down and in several months wrote the book. But not the people in the USA or the Western Hemisphere, but the European group of Club of Rome. And I have to tell you, as a side note, that there were only 2 women for the first 30 years of the Club of Rome. And they were Elizabeth Mann Borghese, the daughter of Thomas Mann, the famous author, and a nun from Rome, where the first meeting was held, Eleonora Mancini, who was the head of futures in the Vatican. All right, so they published the book, and of course it sold 38 million copies, and it was published in multiple languages. And then when they went and made the presentation, they made the presentation together. But the Club of Rome never invited Dana to become a member, which I remind them continually, and from as a female from the United States, because when we started our USA Club of Rome, Hazel Henderson, the author of many books, Solar Politics, etc., said, I will only come in if 50% of the members are women. So they ran around and got people like Michaela Walsh, who started Women's World Bank, and Elizabeth Dodson Gray, who was the head of a large divinity program at Harvard University, and Irene Tinker, who started the Women's Conference for the United Nations. All right. But I think the more interesting question is not how poor Dana was set upon the way most of we women in the 60s and 70s were given Cinderella roles in the kitchen, sweeping up the crumbs from the table. But I think the more important thing is how she went on with her life. And I think she went on doing systems dynamics. And one of the big things she did was a project with IASA, which was in Vienna. And there were 10 conferences on global modeling after her book and Dennis's and her project report. And that culminated in a very interesting title, Groping in the Dark, where she, John Richardson, and Gerhard Bruckmann, who was leading IASA modeling, compared and brought together the modelers And John has told me that they did that so the modelers wouldn't continue to squabble with one another, because Dana always had this ability to bring warring or feuding people together and make some common sense out of their mutual goals. At any rate, you may find Groping in the Dark an interesting book to read about the models and what each one of them did. And then, of course, she went on to do the Global Citizen papers, and Dancing with Systems is one of the really wonderful, short, simple, straight to the point, where she spoke to the public, which I think is one of her greatest attributes. She was able to bring very complicated things down to the level of every man, so that somebody walking down the street could understand what she was talking about and how that was relevant to their life. But of course, then she made a pivot after having made the Sustainability Institute, which Marta is at, and which has been the Dana Meadows Institute, as well as several other iterations. And she and Dennis got together again, where she was the idea generator and he was the organizer in the Balatron Institute, which is named for a lake in Hungary, where she stimulated a group during the Cold War of East and West modelers who were able to get together and merge their scientific. It's a pity she was taken so early from us. And I do think she tried to live the life that she had talked about, a life of simplicity, a life free of carbon footprints, a life, she had no children, of course. It's very important because our other member, Anne Ehrlich, with her husband, Paul Ehrlich, had written The Population Bomb, and everybody was very, very concerned about population problem. So in that, she walked her talk, but she walked her talk in everything, I think. And Michaela Walsh and Anne Ehrlich and myself and many other people also precluded the joys of family, because we felt that that was very important for the whole footprint of the world. And indeed, we've come from 2 billion to 9 billion and going onward. And I'm now working with a group in South Africa with our new president of the Club of Rome, Mampela Rimpela, who was one of the Black consciousness people who was able to shift in South Africa from the apartheid system to a more democratic kind of government. And they have a system of training young women, who are one of the big problems of students not getting trained, because they drop out because they have all kinds of pregnancies, unwanted, but forced on them. So
Anitra, I'll have to
yes.
stop you here. This is so fascinating that I hate to do this, but thank you for that, for bringing that perspective
Yes.
also of the women in South Africa. That's so important. But I think you're pointing to something very important here, which is how do we work across different perspectives, you know, like in modeling, or you were just mentioning the balloting group, that this initial spirit of the reason why it was formed. And I think that's an important piece where we wanted to go next. So I just wanted to thank you, Anitra, so much for your perspective. And I think this is, you know, I would love to think that your experience is still accessible in the future. This is just the first time that we meet here collectively, and this is just the beginning. So I hope we stay tuned for the next opportunities to engage. But thank you so much, Anitra, for this important contribution here.
Yes, thank you so much, Anitra. And we do look forward to hearing from you again, and hopefully being in conversation with you throughout the series. So we're going to wrap up fairly soon. I have just a couple of more questions for Marta, and we'll be going into breakout rooms. And Carolina will offer us the prompt for that experience, or Carolina and Felicia, I think both are going to guide us into the breakout experience. But as we wrap up, Marta, I just want to of course, thank you. And thank you for bringing, introducing Anitra's voice into the conversation. So important. You know, one of the things that has brought us together, the three of us, Felicia, Caroline, and myself, to work together was this idea of how might we invite the systems field into greater collaboration. And, you know, if we think about that, how do we, you know, possess a certain way of being and awareness that would allow us as humanity to continue to sort of nest ourselves more generatively inside of the systems that we're operating in at the local, state, national, global level. And so I would love to hear some reflections from you on perhaps the challenges and the opportunities of being in systems and connecting and collaborating in systems.
Yeah, so there's multiple ways to respond to this, and I think it would be awesome to have that conversation. So I hope that is a piece of the conversation we're going to have. But to me, there's one important piece that I'm personally invested in is really the question of how do you create spaces for change. So how do we convene spaces where we can actually have authentic conversations around the change that we want to live. And so I tend to, for example, be part of different change initiatives, and I'm not always able to bring the systems lens like explicitly. So one question is like, okay, when can I actually talk systems versus when can I just, introduce a little bit here and there, and maybe not even use the word system. So there is one question, how explicitly people who work in systems can bring all of the tools at disposal when they engage in the existing structures of change that might be completely oblivious to the work of systems work, the systems thinking. And so that's one piece. The other piece is really how do we host across difference in particular, and also there's this whole question around leverage points, right? How do we look for leverage in ways that are not perpetuating a problem solving mentality, but it is done in a way that brings our full humanity. And so, because I think a lot of the systems change has to do with humanizing the existing systems and the existing structures. And when I say humanizing, it means to really create this culture of respect and dignity. And I noticed that some of the most entrenched systems, meaning systems that are very hard to change, are those who have layers and layers and layers of protective policies and mechanisms to stay the way they are. And in the US, one such system is the criminal justice system, that as a foreigner, I'm like, what? We have all these advances in many areas of the culture and society, and there are certain systems that are so entrenched and hard to change. And so then there is the ability to actually prototype and imagine and envision. And then once you cultivate that muscle of envisioning and prototyping, then you can actually see the manifestations of visions already existing. And that's another capacity that in particular donella meadows invites us to cultivate, the capacity to create our threads of possibilities by seeing what is possible already, from the small microcosm to the larger macrocosm. And I just stop here because I just want to be aware of time.
Thank you. I'm going to take a slight privilege here because I do have one more question that I want to surface, even though we're supposed to be moving into the breakout rooms. But just if you could, I just don't want the session to end without a chance to reference this this vision for bioregional centers and collaborative centers that Dana had, and how might we, I think it'd be a beautiful prompt for people as they go into the breakout rooms is what might that look like? What is the possibility of a collaborative bioregional centers that she might have imagined, and how might we draw that into today?
Yeah, just very quickly, Dana envisioned by regional centers, meaning that there would be communities and regions that would be able to come together, or like within each region, people of all walks of life or different experiences and different expertises would be able to engage around the problems that they were seeing. You know, whether it's a rural place or a more urban place, it was a self-organizing capacity around problem solving within regions, and data-driven, so people would be able to actually access data of the status of well-being of the community or the region, but it would be learning, so there would, that learning objective, communication and experimentation, and each center would be connected in a network. And so some communities actually have embraced this model, like the regenerative community models. And so like we have colleagues in South Devon that has brought to our attention that they actually have been inspired by this piece of work. And so the Balaton group was, that Anita mentioned before, was such manifestation of that vision as well.
Thank you, Marta. And, you know, we'll try to share some of these materials by way of follow-up that people might explore further. So with that, I just want to thank you again for sharing your beautiful wisdom and appreciation for Dana's work, and for continuing to embody her work through your work at the Academy for Systems Change. And just so grateful to be here in conversation with you today, and hope you'll come back. And we can now, I'd like to turn it over to Felicia. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing, Marta?
Just a lot of appreciation, because I know that people are really connecting on Dana's work and also on what Anita shared with us. So I'm just very grateful.
Thank you so much. All right, so Felicia, why don't you kick us off into the breakout period, if you don't mind?
Great. So Carolina, I will look to you, although I cannot see you at the moment, to give me the thumbs up or just speak out loud and let us know when the breakout rooms are ready. So I think we'll be in there probably about 10 minutes or so, and we'll give you the warning. I'm going to post a prompt in the chat, but you know, obviously take it loosely. It's meant to be a touchstone. And of course, the bioregional centers and any number of other good questions that have come through are all great. So introduce yourselves to each other, and let's see, is there anything else we wanted to say before we go in the breakout rooms? Well, once we come back, we'll have a little brief debrief from the breakout rooms and a Q&A before we wrap up and hopefully close on time at 11:15. Just to preempt a question, we will be sharing out the video of this presentation, of this meeting, and so that will come in the next week or so. So Carolina, where are we at? Do you need a couple more minutes?
No, the breakout rooms are ready. I'm going to open them. Just a quick note that if you have you will be talking to a couple other people for around 15 minutes. If you have any technical trouble or if you need any help, you have an option at the bottom to leave the breakout room at any moment. So we will be here to help you, and just come back and we will help sort you out. I'll open the rooms now and enjoy the conversations.
Just one question, and the question that people are reflecting in the breakout rooms is in the chat, but just maybe we could read it. I can read it.
Of course.
Is how does Donella Dana Meadows' work relate to your current work? Right?
Great.
Yes.
Thanks.
And also, yeah, and also for people that are for who her work might be new, it's just what feels alive for you about after listening to this conversation. And we will post these prompts also. I will message them to the breakout rooms so that you don't have to remember.
Thank you.
Okay, here we go, everyone. Enjoy.
Should I pause the recording now?
Yeah, probably.